Before we start, I've done many presentations, but this is a first. And it's a first for many different reasons. One is it's part of my MBA network. So Diana and I met doing an MBA book club that we have. And it's so funny because many topics we touched on today is about remote work, online meeting, working from home. And actually that wouldn't have happened without the remote world. So first of all, I wanted to thank all the partners and supporters today that made this happen. But of course, for me, this big thank you is for Diana, that texted me and said, "Hey, I'm reading your book. Do you want to come over and present?" And it's a first because I've never been to Croatia before. And it's also a first because it's the first presentation that I give following my book launch that derivated from the book launch. And it was a special moment when I was asking, whenever the presentation is always a custom-made presentation. So I was interacting and asking, what do you want me to cover? She said, well, I really like that chapter and that chapter. And that was a first. So today I'm a bit nervous and emotional about this presentation. But I want to thank you all for having me, first of all. So the title is From Workaholic to Work-Life Integration, which is probably something that a lot of our people in here and the workforce at the moment can feel with. But moreover, we'll cover redefining career and redefining success. Before we do, I always do a little bit of introduction of who we are as a company, what I stand for. There's a lot of text here in the next couple of slides, just because you will have the slides. I'm very happy to share the slides with you, so you can go back and read them. But I won't be covering everything in the first couple of minutes. So our mission is to create better tomorrows. We've chosen the word of work because, as we see, work is still very dominant in our life, but it triggers and impacts life everywhere, basically. Impacts families. We talked a lot about families today. It impacts communities, stakeholders, government agencies, and all of that are all surrounded with work being the central point of our life at the moment. So for us, we want to inspire other organizations and individuals to do better, basically, to become the best version of themselves. We are a purpose-led organization and we give back a lot. And we want to co-create the future of work by helping companies and organizations become the best version they can. In short, we are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. We align all our business to that, and we collaborate with a company called B1G1, which is Business for Good. Whenever we make business, we also give back. By now it's in our DNA, and until now we've given back to almost 14,000 people across the world and helping them. Our team is fully remote. We have clients in 4 continents, and we have employees at the moment in 4 continents as well. And we all work from wherever we feel like. And we meet. Yes, we do meet occasionally as well. So the biggest thing we did is we want to practice what we preach. And this partly came also from our journey. And I'll share my journey in a second. So whatever we preach to our clients, we also practice ourselves. We have frameworks. We use a lot of external frameworks as well, but we also have a couple of ourselves. One is our work-life tree. One is our business for P, which is business for people, purpose, planet, and profit. And the last one is our wheel of change. This is how we implement change in organizations. But let's get started. These are some of the topics I want to cover today. And I love questions and I love interacting with you. So my goal today is not to finish my presentation, which means we will have a good conversation here today. So feel free to take the questions on and ask questions as well as we go, and even challenge what we're talking today. So we'll look at what success looks like today. We'll look like what the priorities of the workforce are today. We'll look like what do high performers want? Because part of my journey is to get companies to be high performing. So what do high performers want? How do we attract them? How do we retain them? And we'll maybe look into full-time work. Is that a model which is becoming obsolete? We've heard a lot today of statistics and research and people saying, maybe we want to work less. Maybe we want to get towards 25, 30 hours a week. We also look at countries, what their role is, and as I said, challenge me anytime. So let's get started. Redefining career and success. So when we look at career, for example, in the past, traditionally, career was linked to financial prosperity, which often equated with success. And as well, recognition and status as indicators of success. So those things were seen as what success looked like. Can anyone relate to that in terms of like maybe a perspective that is shared, or maybe something that you've seen, or even in your past? You know, a few years ago, you might have been going through university and had a similar perspective. If you can, show your hand, please, so I can get a bit of an understanding. Yeah, so we've seen that before. But next to that, I was not too different than that. My own journey is, I always say I'm a recovering workaholic. Right? So a few years ago, I was living in Australia, and I was easily working 70, 80 hours a week in, week out. I was helping organizations become better versions of themselves. I was looking after my staff and my employees. I definitely was not looking after myself. And when COVID happened, this journey kind of came to a bit of a halt and thought, hang on a second, let's rethink this a little bit as well for myself. But a good week for me used to be when I worked less than 60 hours a week, or around 60 hours a week, when I only took 4 flights, when I was able to leave Monday morning, which usually didn't happen. I usually used to leave Sunday afternoon. And I was able to come back on a Friday night, which also usually didn't happen. I used to come back on a Saturday afternoon, or midday. And one of those status symbols for me was my watch subscription. I used to get a new watch every month. I had automated the process. We are good at automating processes. We do this for a living, so I automated the process in a way that I didn't even have to pick a watch. It would send to me automatically. I didn't have to do that. Taking all the joy away. A big holiday once a year to make up for all the hard work. Does that sound familiar to anyone here in the room? A big holiday to make up for all the hard work. And I was working the career ladder. And if any one of you remembers the show Suits, I was working towards one of those nice corner offices that you see in the movie. A little bit like the view we have today, which is very nice. It's a bit of a different view in a conference, which is nice. Normally we are somewhere in the bunker. So well done on that as well. But then the great shift happened, and a lot of people started rethinking how work is done, and how we actually do. Would you mind refreshing the link of the presentation? So we started rethinking material wealth, right? And maybe we started to think, hang on, maybe success is not actually measured only in material possession. Maybe it's not that watch subscription or the nice car we talk about. Maybe even that financial freedom and peace of mind is an alternative, a different way to look at material wealth. And on top of that, maybe we have to look at personal fulfillment. What does personal fulfillment look like? And when I hear some of the conversations this morning, I can totally relate to that when we talk about maybe I want to spend more time with my kids. Maybe I want to spend time with the elderly, which are often left out in this conversation. Once upon a time, I'm Italian, talking and listening to conversation today is also family rented here. And we had families where we were living together, but now everyone works, right? It's become much more difficult to do that. And maybe we want to look at the journey of work-life a little bit differently. Maybe there is more than just getting a paycheck at the end of the month. Maybe we need to look into different topics like purpose, right? Like, is my work meaningful? Is my work contributing and aligned to my own mission and my own values, right? Now, this all used to be things that didn't really matter or were not really important many, many years ago, or not for the mainstream, but it's becoming more and more a topic. It's becoming more and more different ways of thinking about it. So I called the 2022 the Great Awakening, the year of the Great Awakening. Because what I realized, a lot of people, not just me, were thinking about the priorities very differently. I think COVID had a big impact on that in maybe giving us the time to slow down a second and realizing. For many people, this was already happening, but that was kind of the catalyst. It gave us the time to stop and reflect. So what changed, and how does that impact countries, organizations, and leadership? Well, we've heard it this morning already. One of the main things that really changes, employees realize they want flexibility. So here are statistics for you. Oh. Can you refresh the Google Chrome? No problem. So what actually came out of it is that employees wanted flexibility. So when you look at the statistic of people that wanting to choose between remote work, fully remote offices, hybrid, and in-house, that number shifted completely. While we have that, what do you think is the biggest shift? Did people wanted more hybrid or more remote work? More remote or more hybrid? Choice, that's very nice, yes, combo. Yeah, actually that's spot on. The shift was not that much on the remote work. We wanted more remote work, but you can see we went just from 8 to 11%. So it wasn't a big shift. The biggest shift was people going from, I want to be in the office, to people want to be hybrid. So to have that choice, to be able to have a bit more flexibility. Flexibility is a big word, almost aligned with freedom. I can share a story here. I was with one of my peers on a panel, and Marcelo Lebre, who runs one of the most successful fully remote companies, he's one of the co-founders, and said, well, if you really think of it, I'm Portuguese, I speak Portuguese. If a bigger company in Brazil wanted to offer me a leading job, 20 years ago, for me that would have meant changing school, looking into accommodation, looking into the environment, looking into the dollars, changing bank accounts, selling my house, renting my house, getting a new one, getting a car, finding a school for the kids, all these things. Today, with remote work, all I have to do is Google a resignation letter. I don't need to give away my desk or anything because I'm working fully remote. I can just click on one software and then the next day click on the other one and I'm fully remote. So that has implications and advantages at the same time, right? From an employee perspective, that's great. You can now change, you can work. It also means at the same time that you're also more vulnerable potentially, because now instead of looking at one country for workers, we can look everywhere for workers. And as an organization, even more, if I'm not looking after my employees now, they can look for jobs everywhere. In fact, I had a conversation with one of you today and said like, well, we are competing in Croatia, but technically a lot of online jobs out there, remote works that have conditions that are really challenging for us. So, which brings me to the topic of we're not coming back. Who has heard in 21 and 22, how do we bring back people to the office? Has anyone heard that before? Right? My belief is they're not coming back. And I'm going to elaborate why. Some of them are coming back for a short time if they're forced to. But what are they doing while they come back? Any guesses? What are we doing in the meantime while they have to come back? Looking for a new job. Where was it? Yes, exactly. Right. So this is what the data is telling us, and this is a conversation I had with one of my peers, a remote worker. And I was asking her, what do you do? And she's like, I work in data science for a technology company. It's like, wow, how are you fully remote? Like, well, not actually. My company just asked me to go back. I work in London. We were in Portugal at the time. She lives in Portugal. And she was saying, no, I'm looking for a new remote job. Any ideas what the next thing that happened was? Yeah, she found a new job. Yeah, potentially. Actually, companies are very, very reactive when they want to. So 1 week later, the first unexpected resignations came from all over the company. And we said, like, you know what? We're actually going remote. We're going to allow this to companies. Is this an exception, or do you think this is happening more and more?
It is happening more and more because the pressure from the employees is much more potent than it was.
Exactly, yes. The pressure of the employees is much more potent than it was. In other words, the great resignation isn't over. And what a recent survey is actually showing is that 40% of the employees are thinking about leaving their jobs. Now, the US is the country that usually gets the best data, or is really good at doing data. But when you look at statistics around the world, the numbers are not different, right? What else? This is from McKinsey. This is one is from the US Bureau of Labor. is saying it's actually much more difficult to retain workers, to keep them. So it's 25% more higher than before the pandemic, right? 25% is a lot. So this movement started, which is called the Big Quit. Why are people quitting? Because this is, for me, the data can be really powerful, but it's what we do with information out of it, right? So burnout is the leading cause of resignation. 89% of it, of people questioned, surveyed, actually picked burnout as the #1 reason why they're quitting their jobs, right? If you go back to some of the conversation this morning, we're talking about being available all the time, we're talking about the stress, we're talking about balancing career and life, right? That can easily learn to burnout. The next one is feeling disrespectful at work, right? In other ways, is the way we treat people, the way we interact with people is becoming very, very important. And insufficient benefits is only one of them. And benefits is not only salary, benefits is also like something like working from home, flexibility, healthcare, and all those things. And lastly, long working hours. When you combine those things, you can see how that picture is really, really strong. In this study, people could choose multiple things, right? It won't add up to 100%. People were able to choose multiple things. And which brings me to the next point, which is full-time work is pretty much obsolete. It's a concept that is going towards extinction. I know it's near in our companies today still. I'm looking at the future here. But what we're seeing is a trend to go away from the way we perceive full-time work. Right? So, got another conversation here. I like to have my presentation very practical. I was talking to one of my clients, and she said, well, my boss called me and was very excited that we can go back to work full-time. On her end, she was like, well, how do I tell my boss that I don't want to go back to work full-time? Do you think this is an isolated case? Has this happened to any of you, maybe, that you were on reduced hours during the pandemic and then the pandemic ended and you had to go back and you actually fine working less? Well, the percentage of freelance jobs is actually growing all over the world. In the US, is already 1/3 of the jobs are freelance jobs. And it's growing. It's a growing trend. Which brings me to the next point. So we looked at what's happening around us to just get on the same place, what's happening all around us. We looked at how success is being redefined by going more towards purpose, by going more towards meaningful work. But if success is changing, how does career change as well? And that's actually quite interesting because expectations, shifting values, and lifestyle choices are the main factor that are redefining how career is perceived. So one of them is traditional motivators like seniority and job perks are less important. Job perks would be like something like a gym membership, or like you can come to work with a bicycle and you can have a cleaner like we used to do at the Google. Someone will wash your clothes, right? Or you can have a sleeping pod in the office. Those are traditional job perks if you want. Hierarchical structures. In other words, that leadership structure that we often look at as a pyramid, right? That's becoming also more or less important. The office culture and the toxic competitiveness are staying in the way, so they're being challenged. They're seen as something that doesn't really work, doesn't really motivate people to work. And on top of that, the old path of climbing the career ladder, right? We often hear that if you work hard enough, you will be promoted. You can get the chance to become a manager. And you have to take it right now. You cannot go back to it, right? We've heard it this morning as well, where that's real pressure there. Well, entire generations of workforce are completely opting out of the system. They're saying, you know what, if this is what career looks like, not interested. Yeah. More than that, people no longer want to be locked in a system that owns them. Now, when I work with my colleagues in Japan, it's very funny because in Japan you cannot resign from a job and you cannot fire people. That's socially not acceptable. But the younger generations are working in startups, and they're like, we don't want that. I don't want to work for the rest of my life in one company, right? So thinking like, yeah, that, no, thank you. I want something different. I want something else. What else? Well, freedom and flexibility is the new currency. The more freedom and flexibility people have in their careers, the more they are attracted to do a specific job. And this is quite interesting. If you think about it, you have multinationals that are struggling to find workers, right? Who's struggling to find, who's heard that before? Like, it's very tough to get workers at the moment. Anyone have heard it before? Yeah. Yet, some of the startups out there, they don't know what to do. They receive so many applications. And if you think about that, this is the paradox, right? It's a startup that has a good chance of failing versus a multinational that has been there for a very long time, is very stable, but the multinational cannot find people, and the startups cannot decide what to do with so many applications that they have. So on one end, you have startups that are looking at it and going, okay, we need to increase the steps of how people get a job, right? This is where you are usually asked to do a video, or to provide a presentation, or to answer some questions. And on the other end, you have companies going like, what should we do? Maybe we'll pay them more money. Or maybe we need to decrease the entry-level requirements of it. So those are the two worlds. And when you look at it, what really startups have changed to do and have understood to do is, how can we gain and attract talent? And how this game is actually changing. So what else? Well, the next thing is happening is people are no longer loyal to countries. Now you're probably questioning, like, how does that look like? Well, there's an entire workforce out there that is not locked into any country at all. Maybe by force of nature they have to be registered somewhere, but they're not doing their work in the countries that they're working with. So there's 35 million people, and that is just an estimate. It's very difficult to count that are location dependent. They travel from one destination to the other. 35 million people is a lot of people. To give you a bit of a comparison, Germany, that's the biggest workforce in Europe, is 45 million people, and there are 35 million people already. Now I hope my Google search skills didn't let me down, right? Because I also looked up Croatia, and I understand there's 1.2 million workers in Croatia, right? So if you look at that, that means that there's 30 times the amount of workers worldwide that are available for you to be hosted, basically, that are not locked in any country, and they can do their jobs regardless of where they find the best conditions for it. What does it mean? It means that maybe I don't need anymore to have that career ladder because I don't need to reach that status. I can just move from one country in the Balkans to the other in the Balkans. And now the cost of living is lower, and I might have found a better deal there. Or look at what's happening in Italy. Italy is throwing money at people to move there because they have a decline in the population. So you can move in a city outside of Rome, and they will pay half of your rent, up to 600 euros, for you to be there, right? And that comes on top of the benefits. We've heard some digital nomad benefits earlier on mentioned as well. Croatia is one of the leading countries on implementing that, but the competition is immense. So what it actually means is that at the end of the day, countries will also have to up their game to be able to compete for workers. Which brings me to the next topic. How do we win this war for talent? Well, if you really think about it, the big thing here is freedom. Flexibility and freedom to do the work in a different way, which is more aligned to our values. So work-life integration, integratio, I think I heard that earlier before, is becoming the basis. So if you don't have that, you're really out of the market. You're pushing yourself out. And companies must provide clarity on the purpose. So it's not anymore enough to have a nice brochure where the purpose is defined, but it's more about actually living it and showing how this actually connects to the work I do. In a way, we need to answer what works really stands for. How is this connected? And new ways of working require a new social contract and a cultural shift. We've heard it before, and for me this is one of the most difficult things that I see out there. We don't provide enough training and support and resources to people to work this way. We often, managers and leaders get blamed, and especially if you look at the middle management, we are overworked, overstressed, not enough resources, not enough time. How are they supposed to learn the new things on top of the jobs they're doing when they're already drained for that? Which means preparation, training, and the right tools are necessary for this implementation. And for me, when you look at it, the word of this year for me is balance, which is the ultimate game. How do we manage to get balance? Now, balance can be in many ways. We heard today about balance between partners, right? And doing chores, but also providing an income for the family, so looking out financially. Something that generationally happened to be one part or the other part, but now is both of our parts. Providing education, but also looking after ourselves. And if I know something about the cultures that are in the south, in the Mediterranean area and in South Europe, we are really good at providing for everyone else, right? Really good at looking after everyone else. But we actually need to find the balance as well in looking after ourselves, right? The image that comes to mind is that image that we hear on a flight, you know, when we do the safety check, you know, put your mask on first, right? That's something that maybe we need to get a little bit better at. If you don't get there, what is the alternative? The alternative is there. So I like to look at leadership in a very practical way. So leadership for me is not about the theory, it's about the practice. And when you look at the practice, it's a game of consequences, right? You don't have to do anything in a certain way, but the way you do it, it will dictate what comes back to you as a consequence. You know, you don't have to provide and go into the future of work that we just talked about. You can opt out of that. But what will it actually mean for you as a company? It means that, well, probably there will be a lot of fear and lack, fear of change and lack of knowledge that holds company back to become a better version of themselves, to be profitable. It also means that probably I will have to pay higher salaries than most companies do, because I have to make it worthwhile they're paying for people to actually be there, which is already there. It's depressing to say. It means higher turnover. It means employment will be a means to the end. It will be that, I'll be looking for the next job, but for the time being I'm here, I'm locked in, I'm physically present, but I'm actually not part of it, right? For me, this was always very interesting when we did cultural transformation programs in organizations, that there are certain people that have a reputation, right? And there are certain people within the company that have a reputation, they're just here, they're just ticking the box, they're not doing anything. Have you had anyone of that before you've been in touch, maybe one of your colleagues or one of your leaders? Yeah. Has anyone encountered one of those, right? Very often what happened is when you spoke to them, they were highly engaged after work, right? What do they do after work? Any thoughts? Things that interest us. Yeah. What else? Work again, yeah. Another job, yeah. But what I always find impressive is that employee who's categorized lazy, they usually do a lot of volunteer work. They go out of their work and they go and work for free. When, Monday to Friday, in a traditional setting, they're deemed as the people that don't work really well, but yet they're the people that go and do volunteer work. Not just one. They look after the community, they cook for the elderly, they go and do volunteering, they do the marathon run, and we do all of those things, yet at work we cannot get them motivated to do something. That's probably like when the work is perceived as means to an end. I just need to work to fund my apartment. I just need to do it until I retire, right? Which is also something that's becoming more and more obsolete. And as a result, there's low engagement. And usually in those companies, you also have low innovation. And we talked about startups a little bit earlier before, but this is what I see. I see the gap becoming bigger and bigger. And I see the gap because between those companies that, you know what, we are all in. We wanted to create amazing workplaces where our people feel valued, where our people feel respected, they're showing up, they are super motivated, and they contribute. And the opposite. And one of the new frontiers today is mental health. Now, when I saw this finding from the study, I was shocked in a good way. I always thought mental health resources make a big impact, but 80% of the people asked, right? The majority of people asked in companies said, actually, I would stay longer in a company if they are to offer mental health resources. And I know it's actually a question for you. How is it in Croatia? I know in Italy mental health is something we don't talk about. Right? So, same here. Okay. I was almost making an assumption, but I thought, let me ask first. And this is a shocking number for me, is around 4 million people left in 2021 every month, voluntarily. We heard a lot about the recent people getting fired in the US in the startup tech world. But this is, for me, is more shocking because these people left voluntarily and they're not looking to go back to this. Overall, in 2021, which is not even 2 years ago, we're looking at 47 million people left their jobs voluntarily. So we talked about high performance, which is the talent, right? And I would like to think that most of you here are high performers. Otherwise, why would you be at a conference learning about this stuff, right? Well, the rules have changed. And this goes a long ways with how people perceive career and success. So things that used to be really important, like the corner office, a big salary, a car, all those benefits that you used to have, all those perks, the career ladder, they're becoming less and less important. In fact, they don't move the needle anymore. Okay? And now let's do a bit of an experiment in some ways. I'll look at something else, but in a second I'll ask you to get up and maybe join me in a little game. I think it was the lady in yellow said that people have more and more bargaining power, right? That is true, and all the research indicates that. In fact, the Economist said it's the year that we have the most bargaining power ever. More work-life balance and mental health is required. Equally, time over compensation, right? Let me ask you here, if any one of you had the option to earn a bit less but have more time free, would you take it? Yeah, I can see the majority of hands going up, right? So, and really interesting here is about high performance, right? If you ask the people that are just making it ends meet to the end of the month, they obviously can't have that luxury. They will take 100 euros more because it means a better impact for their families again. But other than that, when you reach a certain level, the money doesn't move the needle anymore. Right? People are really opting for purpose-led organization. It's the number one questions that is getting asked more and more is what is the purpose of the business, and people will be able to cross-reference units. It's almost like when you watch the Law and Order TV shows, right? The cross-examination. People want fair and equitable treatment of employees. We heard about woman and man dynamics this morning. That's part of that, fair and equitable. And also wellness is the new frontier under the microscope. What kind of wellness are your employee having? And as a result of that, one of the new questions being asked in organizations worldwide is, do you have a chief purpose officer? Do you have a chief sustainability officer? So we see some buzzwords here: autonomy, flexible work hours, purpose, all of these. But in a minute, I would like you to ask you, actually, if you can, to stand up for me. If you can, stand up. Be ready to move, because if you want to drop your pen and paper on the chair, you can. Because in a minute, I'm going to show you some buzzwords. So you don't need to move straight away. You can move when I tell you to move. But I want you to lock in your answer, okay? Because what do you think is going to happen if I wanted to go left, but I see everyone else is going right? What am I likely to do? To go right as well, right? So I want you to lock in your answer. And it's just for us to have a bit of a game and a bit of a reference, right? So we have career and lifestyle, we have command and control, we have autonomy, we have the corner office, we have flexible work hours, we have fixed tasks, we have teamwork, we have success, and we have unlimited holidays. And we have a signing bonus or working for a purpose-led organization. In a second, I want you to lock it in, right? Which one would you gravitate to? If you have a job offer for 2 different jobs, which one would you going to go? And when you're ready, just move towards that part, of course, if you're going for lifestyle, this part of the room. Go. Perfect, right? Salary, right, okay. It's part of your signing bonus, yeah. So it's very interesting. Pretty much everyone shifted towards left, right? There's some of you that does, yes.
This is a really bad trick, unlimited holidays, so no chance that anyone would spend on this.
Yeah, but this is the reality for a lot of companies, right? So it is very unfair, right? Probably the irony is that the very challenge is like a bit like with the parental leave, is in a lot of companies that have unlimited holidays, they now are tracking that people actually take it. But it's really there, right? So this is where, for me, leadership becomes practice. This stuff becomes practical. Because we can talk about it, but when I'm confronted with a situation, do I take one job or the other? We can see how those emotions and how those career shifts actually happen. Now, do you think this would have been the same maybe 20 or 30 years ago? Or do you think 20 or 30 years ago, we would have all moved to the career side?
Well, this wouldn't have been offered 20 Wouldn't be a lift.
Ironically, this actually already existed 20, 30 years ago. And some companies were doing it, but they were like little unknown companies. And people used to say, feel free to take a seat again. People used to say, this is not possible, this is only possible in Brazil, this is only possible in that sector. Now what we're seeing now is it's becoming best practice pretty much everywhere. So, I've asked a few questions along the way, but do we have any last questions as well?
What happens to companies that are not able to offer remote work? We have talks with people that have to be there.
Yes. So the question is, what happens to companies that are not able to offer remote work? This is the really interesting part thing, because I think remote work is a symptom, it's not the root cause. So remote work is not what's actually is really required. If you look at even the statistic, it moved from 8% to 11%. What people really want is flexibility. I grew up working in restaurants trying to fund my studies, and even already 20 years ago, it was one crazy, in a way, business owner that gave their employees a free weekend once a month. No one was leaving their job because no other restaurant would offer a free weekend to the workers in the restaurant. Kitchen staff, work staff, they all had that. So if you are doing jobs that are not physically possible to do remote, you got to think about flexibility and freedom. That's the 2 key words. How can I offer that in a different way, right? So, for example, you could still do a 4-day work week, even if you're operating a 7-day business. It still works. You have to just schedule it differently. And that's all possible. And on top of that, there was a study conducted that I don't have here today, but almost every job in the world can be done to 40% remote. So even there, 40% of the portion, which is 2 days a week, if you like to think of a 5-day work week, is possible to do remote. We talked about obstetrician and gynecology this morning. I have a colleague of mine, a peer, he runs a clinic for fertility treatment, right? They do babies. You cannot do babies remote. But they did a statistic, and the least amount of work that people could do remotely was 20%. Some of the jobs were easily be done completely remote.
What about manufacturing? You cannot make this work in manufacturing. For instance, we were trying to make happen for women when they are coming back from their maternity leave.
Yes.
To have 4 hours possible, but then you need someone else who is willing to work 4 hours.
Yes.
So it's an 8-hour shift. The line works 24 hours, so every 8 hours there.
Yes.
So that's the problem.
I understand that, and it's really care workers as well, yeah. And you have examples in the Netherlands, for example. You have Birdsok, which is one of the leading companies now in that field, employing tens of thousands of workers. They all work very differently as well, and they have management ways where it's very easy for them to quicken exchange. And what I always find is that when we start asking ourselves if it's not possible, that's probably the opportunity to find the edge on the competition. Because if it's difficult and no one has figured it out yet, that's the big... If it's already happening, we can follow someone else and make it happen. But if we are the first one to trigger, it means we will, like the restaurant owner, that will get all the stuff, right? And what really works very often is to include the workers in this process and making it work. And if it doesn't work and the workers are part of it, we go away with the knowing that the company is really trying to make this happen. And even if you didn't find a way of making it happen, they're still more satisfied because they know at core the intentions is there. What very often happens is it's not possible today, but then a week later, a month later, 2 months later, a year later, someone goes like, actually, we looked at this, that didn't work, but now, I also have someone else that can do a 4-hour shift. And then on top of that, we need to start to look at people holistically across the business. So that also makes a big impact.
Maybe a little bit tricky for you because you said it's your first time in Croatia, but listening all day to the topics we discussed and the talks we had, would you say that the topics we are challenging now, facing the challenges, are behind the times in Europe, let's say, behind the company culture in Europe, or at the same level, or in time? Or what would you say?
No, actually, these topics, I hear them all around the world. I hear them in other companies, in other countries, like Albania. I spent quite a bit of time in Albania recently. It's very similar. In Portugal. You hear them in Portugal, you hear them in Germany, you hear them in Norway. The question is different, but the problematic is very often similar. And we're looking at it from a different lens. I didn't find too much difference here than I found in other conversations. I was living in Australia, and that scenario that we saw in the video of the parental leave, I have a friend of mine working a high caliber job in the banking industry. He took the job because it was 4 months parental leave. When he had his son and he wanted to take the 4 months parental leave, his boss said, "We don't have it over here." It's like, yeah, we have it. It's in my contract. Yeah, forget about what's your contract. If you want to keep your job, you're not taking 4 months off. Right? So it's the same problematic that's here. It's also there.
Now some of you are looking at me like, what have you done?
No, we are lifestyle destination.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah. No, I was just adding a comment. We are usually considered to be a lifestyle destination for traditional immigrant
Yes.
entrepreneurs, and that could be considered a major advantage if nothing else works.
It is. At the same time, it's also the flipping the coin, right? So a lot of people are coming to Croatia to enjoy the work lifestyle, but we don't often have it in our workforce here. It's the same in Italy, it's the same in Portugal, it's the same in many destinations which are prime for digital nomads. The work-life balance of the people, the local people, is very poor compared to that. So it's probably time to integrate. I had a question to the yellow lady and a question here.
So how do you envision the development of the labor market, let's say in Europe, going forward? So what do you think the world is going to look like, I don't know, in 2030, for example?
That's a big question. 20, 30 years ago, I don't think even we need to go that far in advance, even 5 to 10 years from now.
I meant 2030, like 7 years from now.
I think the game will change because we've gone on those maze, and for many years we've been on this maze of just following the path, right? And then eventually we had the women movement, and what we're trying to do is we try to do the same to do the same. It didn't work for men, to also do that for women. And now we've come to the realization, hang on a second, we are both unhappy, and this lifestyle is not actually aligned with the way we should live our life. So if you go back 100 or 200 years ago, our lives used to be very different. And I think with technology and everything, we will move more towards models that are more sustainable for families and communities. So I think people will migrate out of the big cities. People will look for a way of working which is more balanced with their interests and lives. So maybe go back towards working 25, 30 hours a week, both parties maybe, rather than just one overworking and one staying at home. And like those disciplines will merge, and we actually learn to work in a completely different way. What I see is the boundaries of Monday to Friday, when to start working, when to end working, that will always go away. And it will be more flexible and intertwined way. But we also have to learn to have boundaries. For example, we need to learn that when your employee says, hey, it's 8 p.m., I'm with my family, I will get back to you tomorrow, that's totally acceptable. But we also need to learn that maybe we don't need to send that email out at 8 p.m. Or that if we send an email out at 8 p.m., the people know that it's just me working on my time, but I don't expect you to reply until 3 days from now. So like all those things for me are things that we're going towards the future. And how transparency will dictate that. There will be much more transparency in what the work actually contributes to, what the salaries are, what the benefits are, who's getting what. I think the way is towards that. And so overall, it's a human-driven work world that we are meeting towards.
One final question, and we should wrap it up.
Yeah, I have actually more of a personal question. I remember when you were choosing the country that you will move to after Australia, and you have asked me about Croatia, and I'm actually curious to know what were the reason you have chosen Portugal?
Well, ironically, this is a big question. It's another question. It's a very nice one as well. So when I left Australia, my idea was to move to Madrid first. And then Madrid had a high number of COVID cases. And then I thought, why do I need to pick a country to move? It's so old-fashioned. My work is remote anyway, and I will just start working and traveling. So I looked at the map and looked where were the least COVID cases, which was a little island in Europe, in Greece called Crete. There were 8 cases a day, so nothing. So I moved there first. And as I moved away from the pandemic, so whenever the cases increased, I moved, and from lockdowns. So eventually I wanted to spend the summer in Italy, and it was too expensive. And then Madeira opened a digital nomad community, one of the prime communities, and they do a good job. And 3 months in Portugal was like 1 month in Italy. And I thought, I can go to Portugal. I've never been to Portugal. And then I met the community there, and I got kind of stuck. So I traveled again more, but I remained there because I got to know people that I liked that are living a very similar lifestyle. And I can get away with 25 hours a week these days, so I'm very happy with that. Yeah. So it was nothing against Croatia, except the COVID numbers were higher at the time. Other than that, it's one of the prime destinations for nomads is Croatia in Europe. We're quite advanced compared to others. In that case, you're very advanced. That's it.
If you decide to move to Croatia, I'm sure you will find a lot of advantages. So,
And the corner, as you said.
well, we'll talk about that. It was very interesting. We have to move on. Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for your time. It was really interesting. Thank you very much.